Well, welcome everyone. My name is Adam Savitt. I'm Director of Communications at the Center for Security Policy. Welcome to the latest event in our webinar series today in conjunction with the Committee on the Present Danger of China. Today's program is entitled The Chinese Communist Party, Our Time's Existential Threat to Freedom, featuring Frank Gaffney and General James Jones. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. First of all, you are in listen-only mode, but you can submit text questions if you look at the Q&A box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and I will pass those on to the panel at the end of the presentation. We will be recording this event. It will be available on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/securefreedom, as well as our website, securefreedom.org. With that, I'll hand it over to the Executive Chairman of Center for Security Policy, as well as the Vice Chairman of Committee on the Present Danger of China, Frank Gaffney.
Thank you, Adam, very much. I so appreciate both the great work that you personally do and the support that the Center for Security Policy provides to the Committee on the Present Danger of China. I'm thrilled to be serving in the capacity of Vice Chairman of the committee under the leadership of Brian Kennedy, our chairman. We are privileged to be able to provide, among other very important outputs of the committee, these webinars through the help of the Center for Security Policy. And it is a special privilege to be able to welcome to this particular webinar General James Jones. He has been, I'm proud to say, a friend of mine for 40 years, going back to the time when he served with great distinction in the liaison office in the United States Senate for the U.S. Marine Corps, in which he served at the time and then went on to become, through a succession of promotions, ultimately its commandant. The 21st, do I have that right? No, excuse me, the 32nd commandant, to be precise. Jim has served his country both in uniform and in other capacities with great distinction. A graduate of my alma mater, the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He went into the Marine Corps, became a rifle platoon and company commander, and then moved on up the ranks to a series of command positions that brought him ultimately to become the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and then subsequent to retiring from the Marine Corps, serving as the National Security Advisor to President Barack Obama. He has been very focused over much of that period on China and the developing existential threat to freedom that it represents. And it is a privilege to be able to say that we have worked together a bit on the Committee on the Present Danger's efforts to address that threat, particularly in connection with the underwriting of the threat that we have been providing through our capital markets. We'll be talking about that with General Jones. First, let me welcome him and say again, it's a distinct honor, sir, to have you with us and to tap your cumulative experience for the benefit of our audience. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Frank. You forgot an important award that I received from your hands as the Keeper of the Flame some years ago, but it's an award that I cherish today.
Well, thank you. I was going to mention it in due course, but thank you for bringing it up. And the honor was ours, really, to be able to confer that upon you. General Jones, I guess I'd like to start with a conversation. We'll open it up to questions from our audience, as Adam mentioned in a minute. But let's just sort of level set, if we can, on the nature of the ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping, its dictator, general secretary, the man who will presumably for life be leading that party. And I think it's fair to say in some rather ominous directions. What's your assessment of the China dream as he's propounded it and what he's doing to fulfill it?
Well, Frank, thank you very much, and really that's a good place to start, I think. I would say that since the end of the Cold War, with regard to China, most of the democracies in the world have kind of been asleep at the switch in terms of what their long-term strategic thinking is, and it is one that's, I think, coming into focus now. Hopefully, it's not too late, but it's one that is clearly stated in many of Xi Jinping's proclamations, but it's one of seeking to establish China as the dominant country on the face of the planet during this century. I think, and if it's not this century, it's certainly the next. But I would say that their goal is has more to do with this century than the next one. And they've made fantastic headway. I think we've seen a rise in what I call smart autocracies. The Cold War was against another autocracy, the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union, other than the fact that it had nuclear weapons, didn't have much of anything else that the rest of the world needed or wanted. And so it was a fairly clear contest that resulted, favorably our way and the way of democratic countries.
Why is it a problem, General, if the Chinese become the dominant power in the world? Isn't it just another, trading partner and member of the international community?
Well, yes, that's true, but it's what you do is important, and how you do it is important as well. China at almost every turn has reneged on agreements that they've agreed to. They've certainly shown themselves to be the antithesis of what we would like to see governments by way of treatment of human rights and their own population. The trade balance with us has always been out of whack. I think when I say that some of us were asleep at the switch, and some of our countries were asleep at the switch, is we believe rather wrongly, I think, that for China to succeed the way they want to succeed, at least in terms of trade, that they would eventually see the illogic of a communist system against a free market in a free market society, and that ultimately the free market democratic principles would cause the communist system to fail, and that has not happened. As a matter of fact, due to their advances in technology, their ability to control their society is augmented by a factor of significant proportions. And their tactic with regards to other countries is fairly simple. I say that I like to think of it as 3 steps. One is they penetrate the societies, and they started this in Africa over 10 or 15 years ago. They penetrate, they expand that penetration, and they penetrate by any way, by the way, I should say, but through bribery, coercion, whatever it is. They penetrate the society. Once they're inside, they expand their footprint, and ultimately they seek to dominate the behavior of that society. During my 4 years as in NATO, my other hat was as commander of U.S. forces in Europe and Africa, and I watched with great alarm their penetration and their replacement of the United States as the largest trading partner of the African countries. And the way in which they went about that was very rapid, very skillfully done. I don't think they were as successful as they think they are, but But it gave rise to conversations that I had with many European, African, Asian leaders over the years that basically starts out with, China is here, where are you? Where are you? Why aren't you here?
And their presence is, of course, as you say, accompanied by generally an exploitative and oppressive role as well.
One of my favorite lines with regard to the U.S. posture in the world is, virtual presence is actual absence, and you can't have it. You can't have it both ways. You've got to be engaged, and the United States has been missing in terms of a cohesive engagement strategy in several different continents, while the Chinese system has, you have to say, has been successful so far, where their ambitions are concerned.
Well, let's talk about a couple of examples of that. You've sort of teed up nicely this so-called Belt and Road Initiative, which is much in evidence in Africa, but elsewhere around the world as well, including here in our own hemisphere. General, as you've looked at what that entails, one piece of it, and I think this goes along with your description of the sort of incremental strategy they pursue, has been to offer these seductive, well, I kind of think of them as payday loan arrangements on credit cards. We'll build you the infrastructure you want to have for your society. Oftentimes there's a little corruption to grease the skids, but the effect of all of that has been pretty negative, I think it's fair to say, for most of the countries involved, if not all of them. How is the Belt and Road Initiative playing out as you see it? And is there an opportunity, if we do get engaged, to flip it?
I think I think you're right in pointing out that what China has achieved is not always necessarily the best of all results. Generally, in many African countries, the infrastructure that they've contributed to has been built by Chinese labor that they've imported. I remember once the chief of the general staff in Algeria was proudly telling me that that they had given contracts to China, but that the labor also came from China. And I said, well, where are they? They said, well, they send them over on prison ships. But the end result, I think, generally speaking, is that some of their work is shoddy. It doesn't last long. It's already falling apart. And I think a fundamental mistake is that by bringing in their own labor, they wall themselves off from doing anything for the country in terms of leaving a footprint behind that typically democratic countries, and especially the United States, would do many other things to benefit the society. But absent that visible effort, they really have one choice. So that's why I think we have to get engaged in it. With regard to Belt and Road, I think the virus, one of the consequences of the virus is going to bring this to a screeching halt, at least for a while. I've been involved in an activity called the 3 Cs Initiative, which is to build a north-south corridor in Central and Eastern Europe for energy, telecommunications, and transportation. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union built everything east-west, and today there's very little north-south activities. And 12 countries have now signed up to the 3 Cs Initiative. The 3 Cs are the Adriatic, the Black Sea, and the Baltic Sea. And 12 countries have signed up to join together with over 57 different projects that is going to be a serious competitor to what Russia is doing with regard to using energy as a weapon, but also will significantly help Central and Eastern Europe gain equal footing with Western Europe in terms of economic prosperity and hopefully offsets to the proximity of Russian intimidation.
And the Chinese efforts to penetrate into Europe as well, as they have done in some areas.
That's the alternative to the Belt and Road initiative is the 3 Seas initiative. It's the first big coalition of European countries, EU approved, that is coming together. The big meeting this year will be in Estonia to further the funding and the economic infrastructure that needs to take place in order to make this a success. And by the way, the United States has wisely offered to kick in $1 billion on the energy pillar, which is a very good move.
This is hugely important and hopefully a model for what we could be doing elsewhere as well, General Jones. Let me ask you about one particular piece of the kind of infrastructure that the Chinese Communist Party has been building out, notably, but not exclusively, in these Belt and Road countries, namely 5G, the 5th generation wireless. I know you've expressed in a number of settings real concern about what is involved in that. A number of our allies even, including in countries that you helped secure during your time in government, are on board with it. We're seeing some backing away, fortunately, but what's the true character of that 5G system as you see it brought to them by Huawei? And what can we do, as you see it, to try to stave off its potential implications for our security as well as commercial interests?
During the time that we were somewhat asleep at the switch, China made huge steps in its capabilities to project technology in different parts of the world. And to me, the tip of the iceberg, and the wolf that's closest to the door, if you will, is this race to not only 5G, but I would say secure 5G. The world is going to have 5G, but if you ever hope to have a smart city, if you don't have a secure network, forget it. I mean, it's going to be better, it's going to be quicker, it's going to be faster. But the key ingredient that democracies will offer in the United States, I hope will offer, is secure 5G. I'm aware
because it's not secure. What happens at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, the difference is that China, through Huawei, will offer very, very cheap technology in the 5G arena. But the stipulation is that they do everything. They install it, they maintain it, they control it, they don't train, they won't allow host nation labor to have any part of it. And because it's run by a communist government, the idea that in China that any Chinese company would have a secure capability in relation to the Chinese government is absolutely absurd. And they're certainly not going to export that kind of technology. So from a democratic standpoint, we have the opposite view. We believe in privacy, we believe in security. We want our companies to be secure from the penetration and the outright theft of intellectual properties that's been going on for so long. We want
much of it at the hands of the communist Chinese, right?
Exactly right, and the Russians as well. And I'm happy to be able to say that we do have at least one technology that I'm aware of that is not only secure but impenetrable, and it cannot be reverse engineered. And so I think that when you look at an organization like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and our friends and allies around the world who share democratic values, this is a security architecture that is absolutely the future. And sure, we can't compete with the initial price that Huawei offers, but I'm absolutely certain that 2 or 3 years down the road, the Chinese price gets every bit is more expensive than the Western price. Without
the cost may be measured in other terms besides dollars, of course.
So, you know, 5G, the battle for 5G is really one. It's not about the technology itself, but it's about the infrastructure that goes with it. And if you win the battle of the infrastructure, you've got the once people have invested, you know, it's very hard to get them to tear it apart. And as a matter of fact, in our own country, out in the Midwest, Huawei made some penetrations, and it's interesting to note that most of their penetrations are in small towns around our missile bases.
No accident, comrade, as they say. General, I want to turn momentarily to, you know, what are your most important recommendations about what we do to counter this existential threat to freedom from the Chinese Communist Party. But before we do, I would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of your background, your expertise, your personal hard-won experience to ask you about the other piece of this Chinese threat that is particularly ominous, I think, and that is the military buildup that it has been engaging in now for decades. You've described us being asleep at the switch. I would argue that especially as we have been funding some of the companies that have built the weapon systems that are now targeted at our men and women in uniform, among others of us, is just shocking and something that has to be addressed. I want to thank you personally, sir, for both your clarity on this problem and also lending your name to 2 important letters, which I think helped President Trump decide he wanted to intervene to stop at least, you know, people like you from having your retirement funds invested in such companies through the thrift savings plan. So tell us about the military buildup component of the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, if you would.
Well, Frank, that is the other side of the coin. I believe that China is a great imitator, and I think they have studied our playbook from the 20th century and concluded that they will never be able to achieve their long-term objectives without an overwhelming superiority in their military capability. I'm not one who believes that war with China is inevitable. As a matter of fact, you know, through the 20th century and the Cold War, there are a lot of people who believe that war with the Soviet Union was inevitable, but it turned out not to be. And I think there's that experience can be very instructive for us going ahead with China. But the troubling displays of their military ambition in the South China Sea, for example, is a possible flashpoint. We could possibly have a military accident there, a provoked accident of some sort. But I don't think that we're headed for an inevitability with a war with China. As a matter of fact, we should do everything we can to avoid that. But one way we avoid that is to maintain our superiority in the things that are absolutely most critical to us, and that's our technical capabilities and also our strong intelligence networks, our communications, and also our ability to develop the next generation of weapon systems that will at least deter China from ever thinking that it's going to achieve a dominance in the military spectrum over the United States. And then once that is established, then I think we can go on to see what we can fashion in terms of a reasonable relationship. But I think one of the aftermaths of this virus situation originating from Wuhan and the very obvious Chinese efforts to control the spread of the virus in their own country, but while letting people from the region travel all over the world to spread the infection, is something I just can't believe that they're going to get away with. There has to be a consequence to that horrific behavior that has resulted in the deaths of so many people all over the world. We'll see what happens, but yeah. I think our friends in Europe, frankly, are now seeing Russia and China in a different light. The policy of appeasement, I think, is going to disappear for at least a period of time, and we'll have to see what happens. And I think on the trade issues, you know, if American companies don't come home or move out to go somewhere else, I'd be very surprised and very disappointed.
Yeah. So let's talk about what we need to do about it. Reshoring our supply chains is certainly one of those things. Rebuilding our military, our industrial base, our technology edge is another that you've referred to, sir. Could we talk a little bit about this financing of the Chinese Communist Party through various companies? Again, some of them are sanctioned by our government. It's illegal to do business with them. Some of them are human rights violators, as you've said. Others are involved in their military threat and its expansion. Beyond the idea of having, you know, military government employees and retirees putting their life savings into these companies, which has been stopped, thankfully, by President Trump. Would your advice, sir, be that we ought to be applying that same basic principle to the capital markets more generally? Something the president has certainly alluded to most recently in his speech about responding to the what he called the absolute snuffing, I think, or smothering, excuse me, the absolute smothering of freedom by the Chinese in Hong Kong.
Yeah. So, Frank, I think you know, I think one of the things that we've done over the last few administrations is projected a sense of a questioning as to whether the United States would really prefer to be somewhat more isolationist than anything else. And we've seen that in the Middle East, which has resulted in unfortunate ties with Russia on the part of our traditional friends. We've seen it in Europe, who question our willingness to be involved in leadership positions in so many parts of the world. And I don't think that question's gone away. So until we project and come out with a straightforward policy as to why the United States and what the United States' intention is over the long period with regard to the many relations that we have, and the expectation that the United States will, in fact, come to its senses and stop sending out images that were somewhat timid and less reliable as a result of that, I think we're going to have a continuing erosion in the confidence that in which we've been traditionally held. Having said that, you know, I think that that one of the benefits that we take for granted is the presence of unified commands in various on various continents all over the world. It's been that's just a given. No other country has ever achieved that in a peaceful way for as long as we have. And I believe that those commands, buttressed by the interagency senior representatives of the agency, could be transformed a little bit into a more holistic implementation of our strategy in real time in the geographies that where we want to be seen and heard and respected.
So projecting of confidence and leadership and using the various resources that we have in place all makes eminent sense. I guess one of the signals that we've been sending by underwriting the Chinese Communist Party has been that we are accommodating or kowtowing, appeasing, if you will. And assuming that that were to stop, I just wanted to ask you about one last bit, which I know you've spent a lot of time on, particularly, well, in the course of your career in the military, but also after you left, you worked in the Chamber of Commerce on a 21st century energy project. If you could just very quickly, General, talk a bit about energy as it plays into this question of our security vis-a-vis China, China's ambitions, what they're doing around the world to gain access to energy. It would help round out this conversation, and then we'll take some questions from our audience.
Sure. And as a matter of fact, I think, you know, part of the answer to your question was, what do we do? It does concern the use of energy and the use of our economic might. But I should point out very quickly that the Congress has, in the absence of any kind of Trans-Pacific Partnership program, has started an Asia reassurance initiative that is worthy of note, because it basically brings together the former TPP countries, hopefully with the United States, to offset the Chinese economic vortex in that part of the world that left unchallenged will suck in all of the smaller countries' economies over time, just as they're doing in Hong Kong. Next will be Vietnam, then the Philippines, and so on and so forth. To say nothing of Taiwan, which we all share.
Taiwan. Yeah.
So I think the, you know, how we present ourselves as in leadership, not only in a military capacity, but in an economic capacity. And I think the energy story, tied with the cybersecurity times that we live in, are extremely important pieces here that we need to play very, very well. The energy resurgence of the United States is a tremendous story, and the difference between us and communist countries is we won't use it as a weapon. We'll use it as a means to enhance the prosperity and the advancement of developing countries, and we should be celebrated for that. And that's a big piece of the 3 Cs initiative in Europe. But the generosity that we have shown, the ability to transform ourselves from a have-not nation to a have nation, actually the leader of the world in terms of energy potential, is astonishing. And it's the same thing with the cybersecurity threat. We, just as we've regained a position of leadership on energy issues, we absolutely have to maintain our position as a leader in cybersecurity. And that's why 5G, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and all of that's coming down the road. If we lose that to a communist government like China or Russia or anybody else, we will be living in a different world. So the responsibility the United States has is to build these alliances and networks, not based on military might alone. As a matter of fact, Bob Gates has a pretty good article, I think, in today's news cycle that talks about the over-militarization of American foreign policy. We are more than just a strong military nation. We are a nation that celebrates values, that celebrates economic prosperity, that celebrates freedom, celebrates access to energy, and the right of the individual to live in a free world.
Critically, not least at all. That's one of the things that's really at question here, sir. Is, you know, will that be the world's future prospect, or is that going to be snuffed or smothered, as the president said, like Hong Kong's? And let me just ask you, several of the questions that we've had from our audience relate to sort of different elements of this, but the general, I think, common denominator is, if we're up against a communist regime, and let's make no mistake, that's what it is, authoritarian, autocratic, totalitarian, whatever you want to describe it as, it's clearly about dispensing with freedom. And we need, I think it's fair to say, and you've basically laid out a whole of society response to the challenges that we're seeing from China. How do we get there from here, as you see it? Our society is obviously fractured. We've got rioting going on at the moment. The Chinese are benefiting from that, certainly, if not actually encouraging it. But what would you say to listeners like ours and Americans more generally, General Jones, about the need for such an approach? And as I say, how do we affect it?
Well, I think I think that one of the things that well, there are quite a few things we could talk about, but I think one of the things that's happening in our struggle with China is the fact that a smart autocracy can do things very rapidly. Their decision chain is, the time chain is very, very short. And you can see that how quickly they adjust to world events. We, on the other hand, are still working with a system that was designed in a much more measured time in the 20th century. And we have to figure out, I think we have to figure out a way to become more rapid in how we do things. We need an interagency that is much more able to function in the news cycle. I think that our decision time chain needs to be accelerated. But overall, I think we need to rebuild and reconvince people that we are intent on staying engaged on the big issues, that the United States wants to be a trusted partner, and that we will not stop trying to help developing countries achieve their place in the sun with regard to access to water, energy, economic freedom, military security. My belief, Frank, is that there's a formula here for should really guide whether the U.S. engages or does anything. Number one is, can you establish some sort of security in what you want to do, and how do you do that? And once you do that, what's the next step? Well, the next step is, can you bring in rule of law and a way of governance that is more liberating towards its people than not. And then if you do those two things well, then you have a chance at peace and prosperity. But the military, Bob Gates's article today, I think, is very instructive, because we learned a big lesson after World War II. What did we do after we defeated Japan and Germany? We reached down and helped them rebuild themselves, right? We kind of did the same thing in South Korea. Vietnam, I would say, not so much. And then in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, and our most recent forays, we actually went in with the intent of not doing that. And as a result, we have the situation that we find ourselves in. So leadership, I think, by the United States on the things that free people care about is absolutely essential. And I think we should, the first thing to do is to correct the impression that we're tending to be less engaged, and to rebuild these relationships so that we can continue to be the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Yeah, we've got some very interesting ideas on how we might do that, General, and we can talk about those on another occasion perhaps. But let me just ask you one other piece of this, and we kind of touched on it in the back and forth initially, and that is, are you familiar with a book that was published in 1999 by two senior People's Liberation Army colonels entitled Unrestricted Warfare, which really laid out a litany of means by which the Chinese Communist Party could attack and defeat the United States without using kinetic means, old-fashioned military power. If you look at that litany of possible threat vectors, it seems as though the Chinese have not only developed them all, but have actually utilized many of them, including, by the way, things like pandemics and economic warfare and cyber warfare and influence operations and the like. This obviously is a very handy sort of playbook for what they're up to. And I'm not sure that enough of us are aware that it's available, and if so, that it can be utilized as a means of sort of helping to direct our counter strategy for dealing with them. Are you aware of this book, sir?
I am aware of the topic. I may not be aware of that particular work, but I am very aware of the topic because that's essentially what's going on. Imagine a nightmare scenario of a non-state actor, a terrorist group subsidized by any particular country that's in opposition to us, using the lessons learned from the pandemic.
Right.
So this is really serious stuff, and we need to respect the environment that we're in. We need to change with it. As I said earlier, I don't think we're talking about a war with China in the classic sense, but I think we're talking about a long-term struggle with how to respond to this panoply of threats that, by the way, the Russians are very skillful in launching against us, and the Europeans in meddling in elections and using cyber technology to penetrate our systems. That's why, going back to our discussion on secure 5G, it is absolutely critical that if we have this technology, that we leverage it to its full potential, because it is, at least, it may not be the complete answer, but it's at least part of the answer to the Huawei threat that is a precursor to everything else.
Yeah. And General Leslie, one of the things that clearly, going back really to our very first exchange, is operating here is an ambition on the part of the Chinese Communist Party for sort of global governance under basically their dominion, their diktat, to the extent that they are making common cause with others who have this sort of notion of global governance. Some are called globalists, for want of a better term. How do you personally regard the alternative here? Is a strong and sovereign United States essential to the kind of world that you forecast that has the potential for both peace and prosperity? Or is it really no longer, the case that the so-called Westphalian system of nation states can achieve that only through some sort of global governance arrangement can that be done? Perhaps not communism, hopefully, but some other.
I'll give you a quick answer, then I want to give you an example. So the quick answer is that all empires have beginnings and ends in history, right? Generally, empires end by one of two ways. They're either conquered, defeated, physically defeated, or they implode from within.
Self-destruct.
They don't change with the environment. And to the extent that the 20th century was largely kind of an American empire, if you will, it strikes me that there are too many of our countrymen who think that this is a manifest destiny, that it's always going to be like that. We are being challenged. and we're being challenged across a multitude of societal characteristics, and we need to be able to respond to that. If we do, we'll be just fine. But to think that just building up the American military, which is important, it's kind of the bedrock of everything that follows, is the only thing we need to do is to me a tragic mistake. And I'll give you an example of how things happen. I was over in South Korea not long ago, and I was speaking to a very senior member of the government, and he told me that, you know, in South Korea, I'll put his words into my mouth. He said, we're very proud of the fact that we're now the 10th largest economy in the world, and we have you, the United States, to thank for that. But you should know that approximately 25% of our economy now comes from communist China.
Right.
And what the Chinese are now doing, because they know how much they've penetrated South Korea's economy, they are now able to talk to the South Korean government in ways that they could not talk to them before, by basically suggesting strongly that if the United States did X, Y, and Z in South Korea, that there would be economic repercussions. And specifically, the words are, we will punish you. In South Korea now, 25% of the economy is only tied to China, has no relations whatsoever economically to us. So in a democracy, what do people who are tied to China do? They influence their legislators and their representatives to go easy on China, you know, because it's my company will fail. So here's an example of one of the allies that traditionally has been our closest ally, who freely admits that 25% of the economy is now dominated by China. And that's why, you know, that's why the U.S. leadership in forming a group in Asia involving certainly Japan and Korea and Indonesia and India and many other countries who together could withstand the Chinese economic vortex and create their own vortex and security to stop what's happening. But there's only one country that can bring everybody. There's only one country that can do that. And we have to do.
And it has to be operating as a sovereign nation state, I think, as well as implicit in what you've said. General Jones, I know we're hard out of time because you have another appointment to attend to. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, sir, thank you for your lifetime of service to your country, and then you're continuing to provide, of course, at the Jones Group now. We very much value our collaboration with you and the Committee on the Present Danger of China, and hope that we can continue to build on that because you bring so much, experience as well as good common sense. And I know that it is impactful with audiences like ours. I want to thank our audience for being with us today and encourage everybody to take advantage of the resources that we've been putting together at the Committee on the Present Danger of China's website, which is presentdangerchina.org. Please follow us there and at CPD China on Twitter. General Jones, again, thank you for joining us today. We do hope this will be a continuing conversation with you, and wish the very best to you and your family as you continue to render important service to our country.
Here's to another 40 years.
Amen. Amen. Thank you to you all. Adam, I think we're closed out. God bless you all.
Thank you.